The sprawling estate of Elias Monroe rose like a silent sentinel on the outskirts of New Orleans, Louisiana, its towering silhouette framed against a horizon where cypress trees draped in Spanish moss swayed gently in the humid breeze. The iron gates creaking faintly, as if guarding secrets too heavy for the world to bear, a grand structure of weathered brick and tall windows that once glowed with the warmth of celebration but now stood dim and foreboding, its 20 rooms stretching into shadowed corridors lined with antique furniture, shrouded in dust covers, the air thick with the scent of neglect and the distant echo of a life long faded, where 12 surveillance cameras blinked red in every corner like unblinking eyes. 2 panic rooms hidden behind false walls stocked with supplies for an imagined siege, and a sprawling garden overgrown with weeds that whispered tales of abandonment to anyone who dared to listen. Elias himself, a 4-5-year-old millionaire whose once sharp features were now etched with lines of cynicism and fatigue, moved through this fortress with the cautious tread of a man who had seen too much, his wealth amassed from a real estate empire that had turned marshland into million-dollar properties, now felt like a hollow crown. A legacy tarnished by the betrayals that had carved out his solitude, his brother having sold company secrets to a rival developer for a quick payout, leaving Elias to salvage a crumbling deal under the weight of public scrutiny. His sister forging his signature on loan documents to fund her lavish lifestyle, draining accounts he had built with sweat and sleepless nights, and his former business partner, a man he had toasted with champagne over multi-million-dollar contracts, embezzling funds that vanished into offshore accounts, each act of treachery, a dagger that severed the threads of trust he once held dear, the final blow delivered by the death of his fiancée, Clara, in a car accident on a rain-slicked road 3 years ago, her laughter once filling the estate with life now reduced to a memory that haunted the empty halls, turning the grand dining room where they had planned their future into a sterile vault of silence, her absence leaving behind a void that no amount of security could fill, Elias retreating into a rigid routine that became his armor against the world, tea brewed precisely at dawn in a porcelain cup he never shared. The steam rising like a fleeting ghost of companionship, reviewing grainy security footage for hours to detect any hint of intrusion, inspecting every delivered package with trembling hands as if each apple or loaf of bread might conceal a poison meant to finish him off, his days a monotonous cycle broken only by the brief appearances of rotating staff gardeners, cooks, cleaners who came and went like shadows, most quitting within days due to his curt demands or being fired for perceived slights like glancing too long at a family portrait or asking about the locked West Wing, his voice rarely rising above a mutter, his interactions limited to barked orders or silent nods, the estate a prison of his own making where no footsteps echoed but his own, the isolation deepening with each passing month until health issues began to erode even that fragile control, his hands shaking as he lifted the teacup, his legs weakening during his nightly patrols of the grounds, a fatigue that seeped into his bones, forcing him to confront a reality he had avoided. He could no longer manage alone, the realization dawning like a cold dawn over the swampy landscape, prompting him to make a decision he hadn't imagined possible, reaching out to a staffing agency in Baton Rouge with a list of demands that read like a fortress's manifesto: no criminal history, no social media presence to expose his life, no interest in small talk to probe his past, no curiosity to question his wealth, no exceptions. The agency sifting through candidates and sending 3 profiles that landed on his desk with a thud, Elias discarding the first 2 within seconds, one with a LinkedIn page he deemed too public, another with a question about vacation days he found intrusive, until his eyes settled on the third, Aaliyah Jackson, 29 years old, a black woman described as reserved, disciplined, driven by duty rather than profit, her file sparse and unadorned. No flashy credentials or personal anecdotes, just a quiet promise of competence that made him snort derisively, words like duty and purpose, sounding like hollow marketing jargon to a man who had heard every lie, yet something in the simplicity of her record gave him pause, a flicker of curiosity piercing through the fog of his distrust. Leading him to approve her hire, despite the nagging voice in his head warning against hope. And so it was that on a muggy morning with the air heavy with the scent of magnolias, he watched through the surveillance feed as a slim figure stepped off a weathered city bus at the end of his long driveway, Aaliyah Jackson arriving with no fanfare, no makeup to mask her intent, no jewelry to signal vanity, just a plain black tote bag slung over her shoulder and eyes that met the camera lens without flinching. Her steps steady as she approached the iron gates, pressing the intercom button with a confidence that belied her modest appearance, Elias zooming in on her face, noting the lack of nervous chatter or forced smiles that had irritated him in past hires, the gate buzzing open with a reluctant groan as he granted entry, his heart rate quickening not from fear but from an unfamiliar anticipation, leading him to the front door where he stood in the shadow of the portico, opening it just enough to assess her, Aaliyah pausing on the threshold, bowing her head slightly as if acknowledging his space without invading it, waiting for his permission to step inside, a gesture so subtle yet so respectful that it marked the first crack in the wall of his skepticism, ushering her into the cavernous sitting room where velvet curtains hung heavy with dust and the chandelier above cast a dim, mournful light. The furniture arranged like relics of a forgotten era, and as he gestured for her to sit on a couch that hadn't been occupied in years, he studied her, expecting the usual barrage of questions about salary or schedule, but instead she surprised him with a voice soft yet firm, asking, "The silver in the dining room, should I polish it with a cloth or use the machine?" A question so precise and considerate that it caught him off guard. His response delayed as he processed the shift, finally muttering, "Cloth. It's delicate," his tone gruff but tinged with curiosity, Aaliyah nodding and pulling out a small notebook to jot down the instruction, her movements methodical as she continued with inquiries about cleaning schedules and supply preferences, never once probing into his past, his family, or the fortune that loomed unspoken in the air. And when she left after the interview, walking back down the driveway with the same unhurried gait, Elias found himself lingering at the window, watching her silhouette fade into the humid dusk. The first time in years that someone had crossed his threshold without setting off the alarms of his paranoia, though trust remained a distant horizon, his mind already plotting the next step, a test to probe the depths of her character. Knowing that no one entered his world without facing the crucible of his doubt, the estate's cameras whirring softly in the background as he retreated to his control room, the screens flickering with the promise of a new challenge, the cypress trees outside swaying as if in silent witness to the storm of emotions brewing within, Elias's hands trembling not just from age but from the faint stirrings of a hope he had long buried, the iron gates closing behind Aaliyah with a clang that echoed like the first note of an unfamiliar melody, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test not just her integrity, but the very foundations of his isolated existence. The mansion, standing as both a shield and a cage, its walls holding the echoes of a man who once believed in people, but now waited to see if one could prove him wrong. The surveillance lights blinking like stars in a sky he no longer trusted, the humid air carrying the scent of impending change as the night settled over the estate, thick with the weight of a past he couldn't escape, and a future he dared not imagine. The dawn broke over the sprawling estate of Elias Monroe with a muted glow, the cypress trees casting long, jagged shadows across the dew-kissed lawn, their moss-draped branches swaying gently in the thick Louisiana air, a stillness that belied the tension brewing within the mansion's walls as Elias prepared for the day with a ritualistic precision that had become his lifeline, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea into a chipped porcelain cup, the steam curling upward like a fleeting memory of warmth from a lifelong past. His eyes darting to the surveillance monitors that lined the control room like a war room's command center, each screen flickering with the muted hues of the estate's interior, the 12 cameras capturing every angle of the 20-room labyrinth he called home. And today was different. Today marked the beginning of a test he had devised with the cold calculation of a man who had learned to expect betrayal at every turn, his mind replaying the betrayals that had hollowed him out his brother's sale of company secrets to a rival developer, his sister's forged signatures draining his accounts, his former partner's embezzlement, vanishing millions into shadowy offshore accounts, each wound a lesson etched into his psyche, reinforced by the tragic loss of his fiancée, Clara, whose laughter once danced through these halls, now silenced by a rain-slicked road 3 years ago, leaving the estate a mausoleum of muted grief. And as he moved through the West Wing with a deliberate stride, his footsteps echoing off the polished hardwood floors, he approached the heavy oak door that guarded his private sanctuary, a room no one but he had ever entered, where a steel safe stood sentinel, its contents a glittering hoard of cash stacked in neat bundles, heirloom jewelry glinting under the dim light, and stock certificates yellowing with age, all symbols of a fortune he had fought to protect. And with a calculated twist of his wrist, he propped the safe door ajar, leaving it as an open invitation, a trap baited with temptation, the code scribbled on a slip of paper left carelessly on a nearby table. A staged oversight designed to lure the unwary. Retreating to the control room, where he sank into a worn leather chair, the creak of its frame a familiar sound in the silence, his heart pounding louder than the hum of the monitors, each beat a question mark as he waited for Aaliyah Jackson to arrive. The 9-year-old black woman whose quiet presence had intrigued him the day before, her reserved demeanor and lack of curiosity, a stark contrast to the parade of staff who had come and gone, and at precisely 8 a.m. the front gate buzzed, the cameras catching her figure stepping through with the same unhurried grace, her black tote bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes focused as she entered the mansion, beginning her work with a meticulous care that spoke of discipline, polishing the silver in the dining room with a soft cloth as he had instructed, arranging the linens in the guest rooms with geometric precision, scrubbing the corners of the sitting room with a quiet efficiency that filled the space with a sense of order. For over an hour she moved through the estate like a shadow, showing no interest in the valuables he had scattered as bait, a gold watch left on a mantel, a stack of bills on a desk, her attention fixed on her tasks, and Elias watched, his breath held, the tension coiling tighter with each passing minute, until the moment arrived when she ventured into the West Wing, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Pausing at the threshold of the open safe, the camera zooming in as she froze, her silhouette framed against the glint of wealth. Elias leaning forward in his chair, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests, certain that this was the point of no return, expecting her hand to reach for the cash, her resolve to crumble under the weight of human greed, but Aaliyah did not move as he anticipated, instead pulling out her phone with a steady hand, dialing his assistant with a calm that defied the stakes, her lips moving as she reported, "The safe in the West Wing is open. Should I secure it or wait for Mr. Monroe?" The words transmitted through the speaker in the control room, leaving Elias momentarily stunned, his jaw tightening as he processed her choice. The test unfolding not with theft, but with integrity. And then her phone buzzed again, a call breaking through the silence, her brother's voice crackling with urgency on the other end, revealing a desperate plea: $45,000 needed for a surgery to save his life. The weight of that figure pressing down on her shoulders, her face tightening with a mix of love and anguish, a tear escaping down her cheek as she listened, promising him she'd find a way, the camera capturing every nuance of her struggle. And as she hung up, her gaze returned to the safe. The open door, a siren's call. The cash within a solution to her family's crisis. A single step forward, one handful of bills, and her brother's life could be secured. No one would notice. Elias, a billionaire whose loss would be a drop in the ocean, she a housekeeper whose survival hung by a thread, her heart thundering in her chest, the thought clawing at her mind like a persistent shadow, tempting her with the ease of escape. But then it stopped, a line drawn in her soul, her parents' teachings of honor echoing in her ears, the memory of her grandmother's stories about doing right even when it hurt grounding her. and with a long, trembling breath, she reached not for the money but for the slip of paper. Punching in a random sequence that triggered a sharp beep, the safe locking with a decisive click, sealing away the temptation, Aaliyah collapsing into a nearby armchair, her body shaking as tears flowed freely, not from regret but from the sheer effort of resisting, the emotional toll etched into every shudder. And in the control room, Elias sat motionless, his eyes wide, unblinking, the screens reflecting a scene he had never anticipated. He had seen people lie, he had seen people steal, he had braced for the inevitable fall of human nature. But he had never witnessed someone lock away a fortune with such pain and resolve. This woman shattering the armor of his cynicism, her integrity a mirror to a belief he had buried deep. And for a moment, the silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the cameras, Elias studying her posture as she sat guarding the safe like a sentinel, her tears a testament to her strength, her resolve a beacon in the dim light, and as the minutes ticked by, 2 hours passing with her unmoving vigil, he felt something stir within him, a flicker of something he couldn't name. Surprise, yes, but also a tentative awe, a crack in the wall of his distrust, prompting him to rise from the chair for the first time in hours, his legs unsteady but driven by a purpose he hadn't felt in years, descending the grand staircase with deliberate steps that echoed through the hollow halls, the sound announcing his approach like a herald, Aaliyah standing as he entered the west wing, brushing away the traces of her tears with a quick swipe, though the exhaustion in her eyes betrayed the battle she had fought, Elias looking at her for a long, silent moment, the air thick with unspoken questions, finally saying in a voice rough from disuse, "You're still here." His words carrying a mix of disbelief and respect, Aaliyah taking a deep breath to steady herself, replying, "I found the safe open, called your assistant, and stayed to ensure nothing was taken." Her tone steady despite the vulnerability she had just exposed, Elias nodding slowly, "I know." His admission hanging between them, her eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "You knew?" Prompting him to confess, "I watched it all. The cameras see everything. I saw how you handled it." A silence stretching taut as Aaliyah processed the revelation, her expression shifting to a flicker of disappointment, perhaps a sting of betrayal at being observed so closely, but when she looked up, her voice remained firm. "I understand. This is your home. You have every right to protect it." Her acceptance disarming him further, Elias stepping closer, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket, pulling out a crisp envelope sealed with the Monroe crest, handing it to her with a gravity that belied its contents. Inside a check for $60, 000, his voice low as he said, "This is yours, you earned it." Aaliyah looking at the check, the numbers dancing before her eyes, a lifeline for her brother's surgery, then back at him, her hands trembling as she gently pushed it back toward him. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Doing what's right isn't something that should come with a price tag. It's just what anyone should do." Elias stunned, his breath catching as the words sank in. For years he had believed everyone had a price. Every loyalty could be bought or broken, but here stood a woman turning down a fortune with a grace that defied his worldview, prompting him to ask quietly, almost vulnerably, "Why? Why are you like this?" Aaliyah hesitating, her gaze dropping to the floor as she gathered her thoughts, then meeting his eyes with a truth that carried weight. "Years ago, my brother needed a surgery we couldn't afford. An anonymous donor covered it. I didn't know who until I saw your name on the hospital donor list when I applied here. That's why I came to serve. Not to take." The revelation hitting Elias like a wave, his mind flashing to that donation, a quiet act of charity he had made in Clara's memory, never imagining it would circle back to him in this form, the woman before him a living testament to a goodness he had forgotten, and in that moment, the West Wing, with its locked safe and shadowed corners, became a crucible where two souls met at a crossroads of trust and redemption, the cameras silent witnesses to a shift that would redefine the estate's future. The Monroe Legacy Fund offices buzzed with a newfound energy in the heart of New Orleans, its sleek glass facade overlooking the vibrant streets, where jazz notes floated from nearby cafes and the scent of beignets mingled with the humid air, a far cry from the shadowed isolation of Elias Monroe's estate that had once defined his world. Now, weeks after the pivotal moment in the West Wing, the fund, a dormant charity Elias had established in Clara's memory to support local education and health initiatives, sprang back to life under Alia Jackson's stewardship, her vision transforming it from a forgotten entity into a beacon of community empowerment. With programs designed to provide scholarships for underprivileged youth in the city's overlooked neighborhoods, workshops on financial literacy drawn from her own family's struggles, and partnerships with local clinics to offer free medical screenings, Aaliyah diving into the role with a passion that surprised even her days filled with meetings in sunlit conference rooms where diverse voices brainstormed ideas, her evenings spent reviewing grant applications under the glow of a desk lamp, the $60,000 check. She had declined from Elias, now a symbol of her unyielding principles. But Elias, moved by her revelation of his anonymous donation that had funded her brother's earlier treatment, insisted on covering the surgery costs outright, wiring the funds directly to the hospital with a quiet note that read, "For those who remind us of goodness," his gesture sparking a chain of quiet acts that rippled outward, the estate itself undergoing a metamorphosis as Elias, for the first time in years, flung open the heavy velvet curtains to let sunlight flood the rooms, the dust motes dancing like freed spirits in the beams, hiring a small team of gardeners and cooks under Aliyah's recommendations, people from her community network who brought laughter and stories into the once silent halls, transforming the grand dining room into a space for shared meals, where conversations flowed about dreams rather than suspicions, and community events hosted on the grounds, like a weekend fair where local artists displayed their work and children played under the cypress trees, the iron gates no longer a barrier but an invitation, Elias joining Aaliyah at a fundraiser in a bustling ballroom downtown, his voice steady as he spoke publicly for the first time in years, sharing not his betrayals but his rediscovery of trust, the audience, philanthropists, educators, and city officials applauding as he announced a matching grant program that doubled donations to the fund, drawing national attention from media outlets that profiled the revived Monroe legacy as a model of redemption in philanthropy, an internal audit of Elias's old business dealings uncovering the full extent of his former partner's embezzlement scheme. Documents revealing hidden accounts and falsified reports that led to a swift legal action, Elias testifying in a courtroom where the truth emerged like sunlight-piercing fog, resulting in restitution that he funneled directly into the fund, boosting its endowment to levels that allowed for expanded outreach, such as mobile health units traveling to rural areas outside the city, Aaliyah's leadership shining through as she navigated board meetings with a blend of empathy and strategy, proposing innovative metrics to measure impact, not just dollars distributed but lives changed, stories collected from recipients like a young student who received a scholarship and wrote a heartfelt letter about pursuing engineering, or a family whose medical bills were covered, echoing her own past relief, the fund attracting partnerships with national organizations that amplified its reach, Elias finding himself at events he once avoided, like a ribbon cutting for a new community center funded by the initiative, his hands no longer trembling from fatigue but steady with purpose, the estate blooming with new life as Aaliyah suggested planting a garden in Clara's honor, rows of vibrant flowers that drew butterflies and birds, symbolizing renewal, and Elias, walking the paths with her during a quiet afternoon, sharing anecdotes from his early days in real estate. The conversations evolving into a mentorship where he advised on scaling the fund's operations, Aaliyah in turn teaching him about resilience from her upbringing in a tight-knit family that valued honor above all. The Monroe Legacy Fund's annual report, highlighting milestones: over 500 scholarships awarded, 200 families assisted with health care, and a mentorship program pairing professionals with at-risk youth. The numbers a testament to collaborative effort, drawing praise from experts who cited it as a case study in ethical philanthropy. Elias, reflecting during a solitary evening on the rooftop terrace, the city lights twinkling below like stars reclaimed from darkness, his cynicism eroded by the tangible changes around him, the legal victory against his former partner, not just reclaiming funds but restoring a piece of his dignity, leading to anonymous donations he now made with renewed vigor. Aliyah organizing a summit where fund beneficiaries shared their stories on stage, tears and applause mingling in a room filled with hope. Elias sitting in the audience, his applause the loudest when Aliyah was honored with an award for innovative leadership, the event culminating in a tree-planting ceremony back at the estate, Elias and Aliyah kneeling side by side to place a young oak sapling into the soil, its roots symbolizing the deep connections forged from a single act of integrity. The cypress trees whispering approval in the breeze. And as the sun set, casting golden hues over the grounds, Elias turned to her with a nod, saying, "This isn't just a fund anymore, it's a legacy we build together." Aliyah smiling softly, replying, "And it started with trust." The estate, no longer a fortress but a hub of activity. Staff bustling with purpose, community members visiting for events that fostered bonds, the Monroe Legacy Fund, expanding to neighboring states with satellite programs. Media features turning Elias into a reluctant icon of transformation, his story inspiring articles on second chances in business journals. Aliyah balancing her role with personal growth, enrolling in night classes on nonprofit management, funded by the very organization she led, her brother recovering from surgery and joining as a volunteer, the cycle of goodness completing itself in ways Elias could never have foreseen. The garden blooming wildly with colors Clara would have loved, butterflies flitting as if carrying messages from the past, Elias hosting his first dinner party in years, the table laden with dishes from local chefs, conversations flowing about future projects rather than guarded silences, the fund's impact measured in smiles at graduations, in families reunited after medical crises averted, in youth empowered to dream beyond their circumstances. Aliyah's notebook now filled with visions for global outreach, perhaps partnering with international charities, Elias supporting her ambitions with resources and wisdom, the rooftop terrace becoming their spot for strategic discussions under starlit skies, the city's vibrancy mirroring the revival within the estate's walls. And as word spread, donations poured in from unexpected sources, former rivals touched by the story, anonymous benefactors echoing Elias's own past acts, the fund's endowment growing to sustain generations, Elias finding peace in small moments like watching children play during events, their laughter a balm to his scarred heart, Aliyah's family visiting the estate for a barbecue, her mother hugging Elias with tears of gratitude, the barriers of class and past dissolving in shared humanity, the Monroe Legacy Fund launching an app for real-time grant applications, streamlining aid to those in need, tech innovators praising its efficiency, Elias speaking at a conference on ethical wealth management, his voice strong as he advocated for transparency and philanthropy, the audience inspired to replicate the model, Aliyah receiving invitations to consult for other foundations, her influence spreading like roots from that initial oak tree. The estate's gates now often open for tours showcasing its history and the fund's work, visitors leaving with seeds of hope planted in their hearts. Elias and Aliyah standing together at dusk, the horizon painted in fiery oranges, reflecting on how one test had unraveled a life of isolation into a tapestry of connection, the cypress trees standing tall as guardians of this new chapter. The air alive with possibility. The Monroe Legacy Fund, not just a name but a living force for change, its story whispered in New Orleans streets as a legend of redemption, encouraging others to build bridges where walls once stood. And in the quiet evenings, Elias would sit with a cup of tea, no longer alone, the estate echoing with life, a testament to the power of one honest choice to illuminate the darkest corners.